Okay, motherfuckers. Hi. Welcome to the Philip Ryan. Welcome to the Philip Ryan Deal podcast. Tonight, we're going to talk about something I'm really into right now, and that's kind of how this motherfucking show goes. If I'm interested in something, then we make it a focus of our show. Sometimes I'm not about shit, so the show ain't about shit. But tonight we're gonna watch a video together. I'm sucking on my Ricola. I just poured myself some hot black coffee. I like my coffee like I like my men, okay? What the fuck is wrong with me? Alright, look. Without further ado, we're going to be watching this video from Let's Talk Religion. I really like this creator. Tonight we're going to be talking about pantheism. And I'm just going to go ahead and start playing the video. And then if I feel like talking, I'll hit pause and maybe we'll just watch the whole thing. And then I'll tell you about the little conversation me and Google Gemini and ChatGPT had about pantheism and panpsychism. Okay, here we go. Okay.
The standard view of God to most contemporary people in the West is one where God is the transcendent creator of the world, standing apart from it while occasionally maybe interacting with it. Not only is this a caricature and misrepresentation of the monotheistic faiths and their theologies in many ways, but it also fails to take into consideration the many other ways of conceiving of and understanding God. And arguably on the very opposite end of this understanding is what is known as pantheism, the idea that everything is God, or that God and nature are identical in some way. Broadly defined, this is an idea that can be found all across history in different traditions and different regions of the world. So, what is pantheism? The basic idea of pantheism is kind of hidden right in the name. It's based on the Greek, where pan means all and theos means God. So pantheism, in a literal sense, means something like the teaching where God is all. But don't be fooled into thinking that it's that simple, because there are different definitions of the word and that has been understood and used in many different ways. The person who is perhaps most associated with the term is the 17th century Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza and his philosophy. Indeed, the first use of the term itself is usually traced to the English mathematician Joseph Raphson in 1697, where he uses it in a text specifically to describe Spinoza's philosophy, saying that it teaches, quote, a certain universal substance, material as well as intelligence, that fashions all things that exist out of its own essence. But just because the term itself didn't exist until this point, and therefore that it is deeply connected to the specifically modern European Western intellectual environment, still, that doesn't mean that what is meant by the term in a broad sense can't be found in other regions and times in history. But before we get to that, let's try to define some terms first. The Encyclopedia of Philosophy defines pantheism as the assertion that everything that exists constitutes a unity and that this all-inclusive unity is divine. Whereas the Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy describes it as, quote, the view that deity and cosmos are identical. As Mary Jane Rubenstein points out in her work on pantheologies, these are quite different definitions in certain ways. One asserts a kind of monism, that everything consists of a single unity, whereas the second doesn't necessarily, instead more in a simple way of just identifying God with the cosmos. And this, of course, directly affects what we count as pantheism when we look at it historically. We will keep both of these definitions in mind, what Rubenstein dubs the monistic versus immanentist definitions, as we explore the topic. Another problem with the term pantheism is that it has almost exclusively been used as a derogatory term. It's been used by people to criticize others by calling them pantheists, by accusing them of pantheism, whereas very few people in history, if anyone, actually self-identified as a pantheist until quite recently in history. And today we have a lot of people that do self-identify as pantheists, but this was not the case historically. So this is also important to remember, that this is a term used by those critical of others to accuse those others of being pantheists for their doctrines, and what people counted as being pantheists in that sense varied dramatically from person to person. It's also important to discuss that pantheism is a term and meaning that is strongly connected with other and sometimes very similar terms and concepts. For example, in discussions on pantheism, another very similar term is often brought up: panentheism. What this is essentially a slight modification of pantheism. Rather than that pan is theos, all is God, here pan is en theos, in theos. So the world is in God, but God in God's totality transcends or is more than the world. God isn't limited to simply being the totality of the universe. Sometimes these terms can overlap depending on how one defines pantheism, but it is an important distinction to understand in order to properly follow many of these discussions. There are also other related terms that often come up: monism, panpsychism, non-dualism, and so on, but which all have their distinct uses and meanings, and some of them will reappear in this discussion. For the rest of this discussion, I'll be using pantheism in the very broad sense as including both pantheism and panentheism as it is usually understood, while sometimes maybe clarifying the difference depending on the discussion. So with these definitions in mind, that this broad sense that pantheism teaches that everything is in some way identical to God, or that God is all that there is, where do we find these kinds of philosophies and teachings in history? In some ways, one could argue that some of the earliest known religious traditions professed a kind of pantheism. When we look at the polytheistic religion of ancient Egypt, for example, especially in the later Ramesside period, we find expressions that certainly sound pantheistic, where God, or sometimes the gods in plural, are directly identified with natural phenomena and the cosmos. For example, quote, "You are the sky, you are the earth, you are the netherworld, you are the water, you are the air between them." And the somewhat problematic term animism, which is often used to describe a worldview where all natural objects in the world have individual, maybe divine spirits, is sometimes also used as, or counted, I should say, as a kind of pantheism. In ancient Greek religion and philosophy, we find some of the most famous proponents of pantheism. Even someone like Thales famously stated that, quote, "all things are full of gods." And many of the so-called pre-Socratic philosophers held views that are described as hylozoist. In other words, they believed that matter itself had the property of life and growth. They only disagreed on precisely which matter or element was the foundational one. To Thales it was water, to Anaximenes it was air, to Heraclitus it was fire, and so on. But from what we know of these figures, there's definitely a kind of immanentism or perhaps even pantheism in their way of viewing things. For example, the famous Anaxagoras also said that, quote, "all things are in all things." In fact, there was a Greek god or deity who would come to represent the all with which the pantheistic god is identified, the fittingly named Pan. This was a god associated with wild nature, with the fields and fertility. He was depicted as a half-man, half-goat, with horns, hooves, and a very long phallus. Now, his name probably comes from a word meaning to guard or to watch over, or something like companion. They can mean both, but later on, it was also often instead connected to the word Pan, meaning all, thus identifying him in some way with the totality of nature. It's also from this name that we get the word panic, as it was believed that he was the force that created or initiated panic in people. This monstrous idea of nature as divine itself might have been a reason why, later on in history, the image of Pan became basically the inspiration for how one usually depicts Satan or the devil. To much of classic Orthodox theology, there was nothing more demonic or evil than an identification between the physical world and God. But in ancient Greece, there was nothing strange about this at all. In some sense, we might be able to sense a kind of monistic or even pantheistic tendency in Plato, especially as he was interpreted by the later Neoplatonists. But if there's one philosophical school that is most clearly pantheist in nature, it's probably the Stoics. The Stoics were essentially materialists. They held that everything that exists are bodies or matter. Even the human soul and God are ultimately material, physical things. There is no immaterial first cause like in Aristotle, immaterial souls like in Platonism, and there's certainly no world of forms or anything like it. At the same time, though, they also posit that there's a kind of active, intelligent principle that rules the universe. Matter, sometimes called prime matter, is the passive principle in the world, but there's an active one too. The world is ordered according to reason and intelligence by a force that they call logos. This word is often translated as, well, word, partly thanks to its common use in the New Testament, but logos can mean many different things as well, and it usually does, especially in this case, it certainly does. It's very difficult to translate this word, but among other things, it encapsulates a kind of principle of reason. Logos as reason orders things. It's a faculty of human reason, but also a more universal principle of reason that rules the universe itself. Especially in Stoicism, where the Logos is the governing intelligence that orders the whole cosmos, and it's also identified with God, or Zeus. This quote-unquote pantheistic God of the Stoics is identified with nature itself. It isn't something that stands apart from nature and the world, but permeates all of it in some way. It is, as we said, the active aspect of the world which is part of all things. But remember, the Stoics are materialists, so this God is not something immaterial present in the world, but also somehow a physical thing. Indeed, it is also often called by the term pneuma, which is often translated as breath or fiery breath. God is a kind of fire, in other words. Not literally, of course, but in the sense of being a very subtle and fine kind of matter, similar to fire or breath, for example. It is physical, but somehow permeates all things, being identical to nature itself. All these terms are often used interchangeably by the Stoics: God, nature, logos, the whole, pneuma, to denote the same concept. Of course, we shouldn't limit ourselves to looking only at the so-called Western world and Hellenic thought, for example, as we find a lot of very clear forms of monism or pantheism, for example, in the Indic traditions, like in Hinduism. In the school known as Advaita Vedanta, the absolute reality called Brahman is identical to the self, the Atman, and the world at large. There is only Brahman, and all multiplicity is a kind of illusion, hiding the true nature of things as one with and identical to Brahman. And Brahman is often identified with, quote-unquote, God. Similarly, in the non-dual Shaiva tradition of figures like Abhinavagupta, everything in existence is simply the being and consciousness identical with Shiva, expressing itself in multiple forms but remaining one and unified. Everything is Shiva in a total non-duality that nonetheless includes multiplicity. In modern times, the fact that many of these Eastern traditions had this character was, of course, very well known. And this became a source of criticism. Because in the 18th and 19th century, for example, when some figures would be very critical of pantheists, like Spinoza, for example, they would criticize Spinoza on the basis that he was simply being influenced by quote-unquote Oriental or Hindu teachings, right? But at the same time, and maybe contrary to popular belief and conception about this topic, something like pantheism or pantheism-adjacent theology can also be found in the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. In Christianity, there are, of course, movements in history with such ideas that have been deemed heretical, right? So the Amalricians in the Middle Ages, for example, but even within more widely accepted Orthodox thinkers, too. Thomas Aquinas identified God with being itself, and someone like Meister Eckhart took this to its logical conclusion that God is thus the being of all existent things, therefore the only existent. The ground, which is the word he uses for God's most fundamental and absolute essence, is not exclusively the ground of God, but the ground of all things. So that the ground of the soul and the ground of God is one and the same ground. And many of the Christian mystics across history have expressed themselves in similar ways, both in the Catholic West and the Orthodox East, where Gregory Palamas's distinction between the essence and energies of God was precisely a way of proving that the doctrines of the Orthodox mystics were not pantheist, but which in itself has a certain pantheist flavor to it, right? Again, if we define that term very broadly. I'm not saying it is pantheism, that would be to kind of make something that is a lot more complex into something crude and simple, but you can see why people would go in that direction when talking about it. In Islam, we similarly have many figures who express themselves in monistic and even pantheistic ways. Even though there is always a fine line that is drawn where things like hulul or incarnationism is always avoided, where God is thought to be incarnated in the world in some way. Still, the famous Hallaj, for example, exclaimed, Ana al-Haq, I am the truth, seemingly pointing to a unified divine self beyond the illusory ego. And the brilliant 13th century metaphysician Ibn Arabi and his school developed the doctrine known as Wahdatul Wujud, or the oneness of being, where God is, just like for Aquinas and Eckhart, identified with being itself, and thus the only thing that is. The world, to Ibn Arabi, is simply a constantly renewing and changing display or self-disclosure of the divine attributes inherent in God's oneness. Everything in its multiplicity is the fleeting reflections of God's names and attributes in limited form and displayed on the canvas of being itself. And while someone like Ibn Arabi would emphasize the difference between God and the cosmos as much, if not more, than their unity, and calling him, or indeed someone like Eckhart, a pantheist would be to kind of grossly simplify and misrepresent them, but there is still no denying that there are aspects of this philosophy that fall under a broad definition of pantheism or panentheism. If we define pantheism simply as the assertion that all there is God, then Ibn Arabi would agree. Although he would probably also then write like a full book, 1,000 pages, explaining why the world is not God at the same time, right afterwards, but still. Ibn Arabi and his school, far from being some fringe philosophy within Islam, was a standard part or feature of Islamic mainstream theology for much of history in many places of the world, and he still remains very influential in many circles. Similarly, in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah, we have similar expressions too. While there are many debates within scholarship whether or not there exists any form of unio mystica, or mystical union in Judaism, there is no denying that when we read works like the Zohar or the major Kabbalists, that it sounds awfully monistic and even pantheistic from time to time. Quote, realize that Ein Sof exists in each existent. Do not say this is a stone and not God. God forbid. Rather, all existence is God, and the stone is a thing pervaded by divinity. Or, in perhaps the greatest expounder of Kabbalistic metaphysics in Jewish history, the great Moshe Cordovero, who says in his Or Ne'erav, quote, the Creator, may he be blessed, is found in all things in actuality, while all things are found in him in potential. Azrael of Girona, one of the foundational figures of Kabbalah and the person who seems to have introduced the idea of God as Ein Sof, the infinite, also said, quote, "Nothing is outside of the Ein Sof." Many will look at these statements from figures in the Abrahamic religions and say that these should rather be called panentheism than pantheism, or neither of them, because things are a lot more complex and nuanced than that, and these are all good and true points. But as I said before, we're defining pantheism very broadly here, right? Including pantheism and any kind of statement that seems to sort of collapse the difference between oneness and multiplicity, or God and the world, right? Regardless of how that is explained in the details and the nuances of the philosophy, right? Still, many of these figures and philosophies certainly can be interpreted at least as a kind of pantheism, or as different kinds of pantheologies. There are, of course, many other religions and traditions that we can look at. Sikhism is often considered a monistic and pantheistic religion. The Aztecs had a concept called Teot, which in some readings definitely had a similar character, but we could be here all day by simply going through all such examples. Instead, it is in the Renaissance and the modern world that we get the examples and the kinds of pantheism that we are perhaps more used to, or at least the philosophical systems that were first called pantheism. And the earliest proponents of pantheism as such are probably Giordano Bruno and Baruch Spinoza. Bruno was an Italian Dominican friar who was excommunicated from the church due to his unorthodox views. He traveled all around Europe, staying in places like Geneva, Paris, and London, and wrote profound dialogues and poems where he explores his daring and unique ideas. Core to his philosophy is a rejection of the Aristotelian view of the world and its Ptolemaic geocentric model of the universe. Instead, he was an early follower of Copernicus, holding to a heliocentric model of the universe with the sun at its center. Not only this, but he also extended the conclusions of this to mean that the universe was in fact infinite, consisting of an infinite amount of suns and worlds. But this also affected his metaphysics and theology. Bruno was a kind of materialist, but one in which matter was not some passive substance waiting to be given form from the outside, as in Aristotelianism. Instead, universal matter is the active, divine substance itself. Universal matter, the world soul, and universal intellect or mind is all one and the same thing, only different faculties of the same unified divine substance, which is God. So God is present in his fullness in every part of the universe, even in a material sense. Matter here is itself divine and brings the world forth from itself. Bruno says, "We may conclude that the uniform substance is one, and that truth and being are one, which manifests itself through innumerable particularities and individuals, showing itself in countless concrete individual substances." In this, Bruno differs from most of his predecessors that we have mentioned, even the more pantheistic ones, in this very radical form of material pantheism. Of course, some of the conclusions that Bruno drew from these ideas also eventually got him arrested and famously burnt at the stake in 1600. I am actually currently working on a video dedicated to Bruno, which should come out in the next couple of weeks, so look out for that. Or if you're watching this later, it probably is on the channel already. But despite his gruesome end, Bruno would prove influential for some major figures later on in history. And one of these might have been Baruch Spinoza, arguably the most famous pantheist in history. In works like the Theological Political Treatise, and especially in his Ethics, Spinoza argues for a God that is decidedly impersonal, getting rid of basically all personal aspects of God in classical theology. Instead, God to Spinoza is the one substance of all things. There is only one substance in existence, and that substance is God. Spinoza says, "Whatever is in God, and nothing can be or be conceived without God. All the things of the universe, which certainly doesn't appear to be unified or one, are simply different modes of that one substance. a substance that has infinite attributes, only two of which are knowable to humans, thought and extension, basically mind and body, which are ultimately one and the same to him. It's one substance. Quote, "From the necessity of the divine nature, there must follow infinitely many things in infinitely many modes." A famous formula associated with Spinoza's philosophy is Deus sive natura, God or nature. This seemingly means that Spinoza identifies God with nature itself. Now, as we explored in my previous episode dedicated to Spinoza and his conception of God, things might be a little more complicated than that, and people debate whether he should be called a pantheist or maybe he's more of a panentheist. Some even call him an atheist. And there are different discussions and nuances regarding his philosophy, but still, in a broad sense, this seems to be his philosophy. And that philosophy seems to have also led him to other unique positions, like his determinism, for example, and his ideas on religious freedom and freedom of expression. But that's for another video. Just like with Bruno, Spinoza was a very controversial figure at his time. He was also excommunicated, but by his Jewish community in Amsterdam, and for his, quote, monstrous deeds and abominable heresies. Now, it's never clarified what these monstrous deeds are, but it is commonly guessed that it had to do somehow with precisely these philosophies that he would later put down in writing. And even at that later point, his theological political treatise was condemned by an anonymous critic as a book, quote, forged in hell through collaboration with the devil. And this would kind of be the theme for how Spinoza, and by extension, pantheism, which was coined to explain his philosophy, was conceived afterwards. Rubinstein covers in a great way this reception of pantheism as utterly monstrous to its critics in the modern period. To equate the absolute infinite perfect reality with the dirty, limited, and gross material world was the worst intellectual crime that one could commit. Not to mention that it was seen as utterly ridiculous, seemingly equating opposite concepts that couldn't be brought together. The inherent monism in these pantheologies also ran the risk, to its critics, of making the world into a sludge of nothingness and to entirely negate any morality or ethics. There are, in other words, many different and sometimes even opposing ways that pantheism was criticized. Rubinstein says, "The stated oppositions to pantheism are numerous and often perplexingly opposed to one another. Pantheists are variously charged with materialism and anti-materialism, irrationality and excessive rationality, fanaticism and coldness, idealism and mechanism. Whatever the author's position may be, the pantheist rhetorically incarnates its extreme opposite. The thickest complex of conflicting accusations, however, accumulates around Bayle's first charge against Spinoza, namely that he's an atheist. This common argument essentially says that if God and nature/the universe are identified with each other, then there's no difference between this position and outright atheism. For example, the priest Morgan Dix wrote, "As we comprehend the sacred term, there is left no God. A substance, impersonal there is, but we cannot imagine that unintelligible, unreasoning, unthinking, unloving state of impotence as our Father, our Creator, our Redeemer, and our Sanctifier and Friend. The God in whom we have believed is gone." Another critique is precisely the opposite, that Spinoza's pantheism renders the world meaningless and non-existent in a kind of ridiculous way. There is only God and no objective world. This was the issue that someone like Hegel had with Spinoza, and was the source of comparing him with Eastern teachings like that we mentioned before, of Advaita Vedanta, for example.
Okay, so we've watched a pretty decent amount. The most important part of the video that I wanted you guys to see was more like at the beginning, when he was first starting to describe pantheism. I'm just going to go ahead and stop here, because unless you want to see the rest, are you emotionally invested enough? I think there's like 10 minutes left. I mean, this was not a short video. This is what I call lazy content. I'm performing lazy content tonight. I'm going to put more effort into the podcast tonight, but this is the lazy part of the podcast. This is, you know, streaming and doing my Mystery Science Theater 2025 act is kind of like what we're doing. You know what? I'm just going to go ahead and play the rest of the video and then we'll talk about it. Because pantheism, panantheism, and panpsychism all are, they're three different things, but the ideas are similar. We'll get into it. I'm going to go ahead and finish playing the rest of this video. Why not? Why not? I don't want to miss a motherfucking thing.
Hegel said, "There is therefore no such thing as finite reality. According to Spinoza, what is God and God alone. Therefore, the allegations of those who accuse Spinoza of atheism are the direct opposite of the truth. With him, there is too much God." Adhering to such a monistic pantheism renders the world into some just void of nothingness, just a sludge of no meaning and no existence, and thus any kind of morality or ethics go out the window. This was one of the arguments, right? And these kinds of critiques weren't unique to this historical context either. Even in earlier centuries, in places like the Islamic world, this was a controversial thing. Even though the term pantheism didn't exist, the issues with what it entailed was often discussed, especially in Sufism. We briefly talked about Ibn Arabi before and his philosophy of the oneness of being, and many other Sufis held quite similar monistic ideas. This was, of course, highly criticized by other Muslims who held to a much different theology. The most famous of these critics is probably Ibn Taymiyyah, who singled out people like Ibn Arabi, Ibn al-Farid, and Ibn Sab'in as heretics due to their supposed identifying God and the world. The school of Ibn Sab'in was even referred to as the Laysiya, roughly translated to the school of nothingness, due to their teaching that all other than God is illusion. It's quite similar to some of those modern arguments against pantheism that it makes the world into just nothingness, right? Now, there's some key terms that are used in these kinds of discussions in the Islamic world. Chief among them is the term hulul, which means incarnation. And this was a very no-no kind of subject, right? This is partly a rejection of Christianity, where God becomes incarnated into Christ, but also basically a kind of a rejection of pantheism. And even those more radical Sufis, like Ibn Arabi, arguably, or Ibn Sab'in or Hallaj, who seem to somehow identify God in the world, they would often include a kind of footnote in those discussions saying, what we don't mean is hulul, right? So even though, yes, God is all and all this, God is being and everything is being and the oneness of being, but this is not hulul, this is not incarnationism. God is not incarnated in the world or in any human being. God is not a part of the world. This was very important that this distinction was upheld. So someone like Hallaj, for example, when he says, Ana al-haq, I am the truth, which was the same as saying, essentially, I am God. This was not him self-deifying himself, right? This was rather understood as self-negation, that Hallaj had reached the state of realizing that he never actually existed, but only God existed. Right, so there's a very subtle kind of difference there, and this was always very strictly upheld even by these more radical unitive Sufis. So you can see that this controversy around the implications of these kinds of pantheistic ideas were present even back then. But in the 19th century in the West, some figures started looking differently on these ideas, instead finding in them an inspiring way of looking at the world and a good alternative to the increasingly rationalized, mechanical, and scientifically reductionist attitudes of the Enlightenment. This is particularly true of the Romantic movement, where we see various shades of the adoption of pantheistic notions and ideas. This was an intellectual and cultural movement that looked to the sublime, the experience of nature and the natural world, and the emotions and reverence that it inspired, rather than a cold, Enlightenment-styled scientific rationalism. This was ripe for adopting a pantheistic view of the natural world where the divine is present everywhere. And thus we find this in many of the Romantic poets and writers like Milton, Shelley, Spenser, William Blake, and Tennyson and Whitman. Just listen to this section from Walt Whitman's poem Song of Myself, a poem that is positively teeming with pantheistic sentiment. I hear and behold God in every object, yet understand God not in the least, nor do I understand who there can be more wonderful than myself. Why should I wish to see God better than this day? I see something of God each hour of the 24, and each moment then. In the faces of men and women I see God, and in my own face in the glass. I find letters from God dropped in the street, and every one is signed by God's name. And I leave them where they are, for I know that wheresoever I go, others will punctually come forever and ever. And this popularity has, in many ways, carried over into our contemporary world in the 20th and 21st century. Many of the great intellectuals and scientists of the last century have chosen a more pantheistic perspective of God as being more in line with or easily harmonizable with modern science. Most famous of these is definitely Albert Einstein, who surprisingly spent quite a significant part of his career talking about God, and who deeply believed in a God as the very reason behind the fundamentally rational and perfectly ordered universe. But his God was not the personal God of classic theology. Instead, he famously said when asked that, quote, I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the lawful harmony of the world, not in a God who concerns himself with the fate and the doings of mankind. In other words, he adopted the pantheistic God of Spinoza. And later famous scientists like Carl Sagan have expressed themselves in similar ways. As certain parts of the world have become more secularized and traditional religion has lost its hold and influence, some of the traditional ways of looking at God are kind of eroding. This is certainly true in a place like Sweden, where I am from, but there still remains this seemingly inherent need to maintain a sacredness in reality, to not give up entirely to a mechanistic view of nature and our part in it. I think this is part of what has led to the increased popularity of pantheologies in the contemporary world. It allows people to still hold on to the sacred, but sacredness is projected onto the natural world and the universe itself, that realm that is firmly within the scope of science and our direct experience, rather than to an anthropomorphized transcendent deity. In Sweden and the Nordic countries, for example, we've seen an increase in what can broadly be termed nature spirituality, where people treat nature as something sacred, stating things like that nature is my church or the forest is my temple. People go out into nature and have profound experiences of what they deem to be something sacred or spiritual, what Rudolf Otto called the numinous, experiences that are, for all intents and purposes, religious. They can experience a oneness with the natural world, a sense of meaning and purpose, and other such things. I've actually made a full documentary-style video on this very topic on the channel, so go check that out if you're interested. And this is really a global phenomenon in some ways, with practices like forest bathing becoming more popular. I'm also seeing an increase in the popularity of different forms of pantheisms in places like TikTok and on social media, where young people are discovering new ways of believing and belonging in the world, and where pantheologies are serving as an attractive alternative to dry materialism on the one hand and traditional religion on the other. And this often also becomes directly connected to questions of ecology and the environment. Even since the Romantic movement in the 19th century, this connection has been there, where there has grown an increased awareness of the ecological effects that we have on our environment and on nature. Many will argue, whether true or not, that the Abrahamic religions that have dominated our intellectual culture for so many centuries have an inherently anthropocentric worldview, where the human being is at the center and nature is simply there to serve her, right? To giving us humans free rein to exploit it. The argument goes that this is a key reason why we have treated and continue to treat nature with such a lack of care. And that the antidote to this would be a change in that fundamental perspective, to a pantheistic one where the human isn't at the center, but rather simply a part of a divine ecological whole that deserves reverence and care. Many thus see pantheism and its related ideas to be a solution, or at least a part of a solution, to the environmental and climate crisis that we are currently facing. It could help us see the world as a living organism, of which we simply are a part, rather than as a machine that is external to us. And there's a lot to be said regarding these questions, of course. Rubinstein writes, "Put succinctly, to recognize all things as divine, not by virtue of some essence they share, but in their material particularities, intensifies our sense of relatedness to all things, and this sense can open onto responsibility on the one hand, or disavowal on the other." So, in short, pantheism is a term that is used in a variety of different ways to mean a variety of different things depending on who is talking. It's never been a unified philosophical school or system, except for some of in the contemporary world who identify with it, but it's usually something that was used to discredit others, rarely being used as a term of self-identification. And it certainly isn't a quote-unquote religion in the common sense of that term either. Broadly defined, and including its sister terms like panentheism, we can find traditions and philosophies that fit under this umbrella across history and in different places, from ancient Greece to the Abrahamic religions, but it perhaps reaches its most clear association in modern times with figures like Spinoza. Today, it's also become a term with a much more positive connotation to people who seek a way of relating to the world and God that isn't limited by a strict boundary between faith and reason, or a reverence for the natural world beyond a reductionist scientific perspective. It's seen as a way of helping us better be able to preserve nature by literally deifying it and realizing our interconnectedness with it. Now, with that said, that doesn't mean that the word is used in any more of a unified or simple way today, but continues to be used to denote a variety of different approaches and perspectives, but all unified by the basic notion that God can be found in, or is indeed somehow the same as, the world that we experience all around us. Thank you so much for watching. I would like to extend a special thank you to my patrons.
All right. All right. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Hi. Okay, I'm back. I really, that was very in-depth. You can hear me? Welcome to the Philip Ryan Deal podcast. There's a song that I love by a woman named Mahalia Jackson. She was a gospel singer. Matter of fact, she sang a gospel song right there with Martin Luther King standing on the mall during the civil rights era. Love her, and we're gonna listen to like literally 30 seconds of her song because y'all know that I'm not trying to catch a copyright. Here, hold on. Where's she at? Actually, yes. Here, watch this.
Something I may not know, and there are some places, oh Lord, I cannot go. But I'm sure oh, there's one thing, that God is real, for I can feel Him in my soul.
Okay, isn't that isn't she just lovely? Isn't everything about her just lovely? I have a playlist on Spotify. It's called Old School Gospel, and it's got her and a whole bunch of people on it. So this thing about Spinoza's God, Einstein's God, Einstein's God was Spinoza's God, and guess what? It also happens to be Elon Musk's God.
If we go to the big questions once again, you said you're with Einstein, that you believe in the God of Spinoza.
Yes.
So that's a view that God is like the universe and is reveals himself through the laws of physics, or as Einstein said, through the lawful harmony of the world.
Yeah, I would agree. That God of the simulator or whatever, the supreme being or beings reveal themselves through the physics. They're creators of this existence, and it's incumbent upon us to try to understand more about this wondrous creation.
If we go to the big questions once again, you said you're with Einstein, that you
Okay, yeah. All right. Can you guys see me? Can you hear me? All right. Come on now. Okay, so my God is a real because I feel him in my soul. That's the point. That was the point of playing that song. Because God is real because I feel God in my soul. That's a kind of pantheism, right? I don't know. I think it's interesting that, okay, now it's my turn to talk. As you guys all know, I was born and raised a Jehovah's Witness, and a Jehovah's Witness is, well, they're Christian, but it's a cult. It's not like mainstream Christianity. It is a cult. And I got out of that. Well, they kicked me out. I didn't really have much of a choice. They kicked my queer ass out of church. So that was that. Yeah. But when I got out of the J-Dub and went to college and started learning more about philosophy, Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy, started studying Hinduism and Taoism and Buddhism and everything, all the great mystics and all the monks, and I don't care if it's Catholic monks or Buddhist monks or Hindu monks, Vedantists, or what, kind of seems that a lot of people come around to the conclusion that God is everything, or that the universe is God's body and the consciousness that exists all around us is God. But then there's that pantheism, which means that all exist in God, but God transcends everything, which means God can also be a personal God. So that's the interesting aspect of it. I bought a book, but it wasn't called Pantheism. It was called Paganism. It was a book called Paganism, and I had picked up that book at the library along with some books of Scott Cunningham. I think it was Earth Power, or I bought Earth Power, but I think I took out Wicca for the Solitary Practitioner and Living Wicca and Paganism. And I think that's how I first learned about the concept of pantheism, Because polytheism, which is a belief in many, many gods, that still works even if you're a pantheist, because that means that God manifests as many divine figures, right? Animism still works within a pantheist framework because you're saying that consciousness is all and all is God. That means that everything has some kind of consciousness in it, even if it's not as developed as us. It still is conscious in some way. That we are very highly developed. Okay, so let me just go over here for a second to Google Gemini. Let me see if I can share my screen. Pooh, how do I do that? Here, Google Gemini. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see that. All right, well, doesn't matter if you can see it or not. I'm going to read it. The pantheist worldview is the belief that God and the universe are the same thing, that God is everything and everything is God. The word comes from the Greek pan, all, and theos, God. This view holds that the combined substance, forces, and laws that make up the entire existing universe are what is divine. In simple terms, a pantheist doesn't believe in a God that is separate from and created the universe, but rather that the universe itself is divine and should be treated with reverence and awe, seeing nature as sacred. In this way of thinking, divinity isn't a personal conscious entity that stands outside of or above the world. That's panentheism. But is instead immanent, meaning is present within all things. All objects, including humans, animals, rocks, and the very laws of physics, are viewed as parts of a single, all-encompassing unity. This focus on unity and the divine presence in the world often leads pantheists to have a strong appreciation for nature, a deep interest in scientific understanding of the cosmos, and an ethical approach that promotes harmony and the natural environment. So that is Google Gemini on pantheism. And now I have this conversation that I had with ChatGPT. Explain panpsychism to me, for wind. And so this is panpsychism. Did everybody understand pantheism and pantheism? I hope that, God, how long has this taken? Almost an hour in, we clearly have an understanding of what pantheism and panentheism is. Now, what is panpsychism? Panpsychism is the idea that mind or consciousness is a fundamental and universal feature of reality. In other words, everything has some degree of awareness. Not just humans or animals, but plants, rocks, stars, and even atoms. It doesn't mean a rock is thinking like you do, but that it possesses a tiny glimmer of experience, a spark of interiority. I knew I wasn't going to get that. Interiority. Like interior, inside, interiority. Never heard that fucking word before. I didn't even know that was a word. the internal life of a character. Interiority, it means the internal life of a character, encompassing the thoughts, feelings, and subjective experiences that are not externally observable. I ain't never heard that motherfucking word before. All right. It's a good word. I'm going to find a way to use it this week. The core thought, matter and mind are not separate. Everything physical has a mental aspect, and everything mental has a physical aspect. The universe, therefore, is alive from within a continuum of consciousness, from the dim awareness of particles to the self-awareness of humans. This view tries to solve the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of how matter becomes mind, by saying it doesn't become mind at all. Mind was always there in some primitive way. A simple analogy. Imagine the universe as a great ocean of consciousness. Each wave, a person, tree, a star, a cell, rises up from that ocean with its own pattern, its own form of experience. But when the water is the same everywhere, awareness itself. A philosophical lineage, ancient roots. It's found in Plato, Stoicism, some forms of Vedanta, that's Hinduism, and indigenous animism, that's Ifa, and that's the spirituality of the Tainos and most indigenous people. Modern thinkers, Spinoza, everything is one substance, both thought and extension. And then these other guys, modern resonances in physics, Panpsychism appeals to some who see quantum mechanics hinting that the observer and the observed can't be neatly separated. In ecology, it suggests a sacred relationship between all things, since everything participates in awareness. In spirituality, it resonates with animism, pantheism, and the mystical sense that everything is alive. In plain terms, Panpsychism says, you are not surrounded by dead matter, you are surrounded by living presence. Every bit of the world has its own inwardness, a quiet pulse of being. You and I are simply one of the universe's ways of waking up to itself. I think there might be part of this. Hold on. So I had made a comment to ChatGPT about why did panpsychism become so obscure. It seems that most indigenous peoples, animist, spiritualist, have always held to these beliefs. So when in history was the common understanding eclipsed? And so then it goes into talk about the death of spirit and matter from sacred world to machine world. And here, let me share it. Where are you? So, the death of spirit and matter. Around the 16th and 17th centuries, Europe underwent a seismic shift. The scientific revolution, with thinkers like Descartes, Bacon, Galileo, and Newton, transformed how people understood reality. They wanted to study nature objectively, to measure it, predict it, and master it. To do that, they needed a clean split between mind and matter, subject and object. René Descartes declared, I think, therefore I am. And from that moment, thinking was confined to the human mind. Everything outside rocks, animals, forests, oceans became more mechanisms, lifeless matter running on physical laws. The split, called Cartesian dualism wasn't just philosophy, it was a political act. By stripping nature of soul, you could now exploit it without guilt. Listen to ChatGPT. Oh no, y'all. ChatGPT is woke. Oh man. Oh fuck. Man. I'm just fucking around. I'm playing. AI is pretty fucking woke. That was a very good read. Cut down forest, mine the earth, enslave bodies because they were matter, not spirit. Sounds like ChatGPT is kind of mad. Kind of mad about that. The church's fear of animism. The early Christian church had already begun the separation centuries earlier. To establish orthodoxy, it sought to purge the world of what it called pagan superstition, animism, nature worship, ancestral veneration. To the church, spirits in trees and rivers were demons, not divinities. They replaced a relational cosmos with a hierarchical cosmos. Let me say that again because I fucked it up. To the church, spirits in trees and rivers were demons, not divinities. They replaced a relational cosmos with a hierarchical cosmos. God in heaven, humans in the middle, nature at the bottom. So by the time the scientists came along, the soil was already prepared. The church had desacralized the earth. Science simply took over the project, removing the priest but keeping the dualism. The Industrial Revolution. Soul extraction as policy. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and the new mechanistic worldview found its empire. Factories replaced forest. Time became something to measure by the clock, not by the moon. Nature became resources. Human beings became labor. This wasn't just economic, it was metaphysical. The entire world was recorded as a system of dead objects that could be rearranged, melted, mined, and monetized. Panpsychism, which said the world feels, was now dangerous talk, too mystical, too unprofitable. Survival underground. Yet it never died. In indigenous, African, diasporic, folk Catholic, pagan, and mystical lineages, the old ways kept breathing. Voodoo, Ifa, hoodoo, candomblé, druidry, Taoism, Hermeticism all carried the knowing that the universe is alive. While Western philosophy forgot, the rest of the world remembered. Even within the West, whispers survive. Spinoza's pantheism, romantic poets like Wordsworth and Blake, William James, Whitehead, and more recently, Galen Strawson and Philip Goff brought the flame back into philosophy. Return of the living world. Today, physics, ecology, and consciousness studies are circling back to what you and your ancestors already know. Quantum entanglement, systems theory, and panpsychist philosophy are all rediscovering that the world cannot be separated into minds and matter. We're witnessing what I'd call the re-enchantment of the real, a return to the living continuum. And then, we're going into the Temple of Goo. So we're all done with that. All right. So there you go. Pantheism is kind of weird because it's, it makes sense, but then when you try to think about it, when you try to think about the scale of it, your brain goes limp and just like kind of wants to fall out of your head when you try to think about like how big it is. Like, that's why I can't go outside and stare at the stars and stare up into the universe for too long, because I will have a massive panic attack. I will go into an existential crisis because everything is just so big and huge. and expansive, you know. And like I said, I was 22 when I got kicked out of the church. And I think by the age of 23 or 24, I started going to school and I found, you know, Vedanta, and I found Wicca, and I found Pantheism and paganism. It kind of just made sense coming from where I came from. I was so mad when I realized that the church I was raised in was just another church. I mean, I have a love in my heart for the people that are witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses really are really nice people. They're good people. They're not bad people. They're a part of a cult, but they're not bad people. They're actually really kind. You know what? I think like witnesses attract empaths. I'm surprised you didn't become a witness, Grant. I'm surprised you became a fundamentalist. Because there's a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses that I feel are very, very, very empathic to the point of being damaging, to the point of damage. But yeah, I mean, I grew up being taught that that religion was the only true religion, and everybody who was not a member of that religion was and it didn't make any fucking sense when I got on the outside of the cult, especially because of the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses, you know, showed up 1,500 years after Jesus lived. I just can't even, like, I can't. So that's a problem for me because that's why I can't be a member of a religion. I can't, it's like I can't do religion. I can do spirituality, and I can do spirituality all day long. But religion, man, to me, religion and politics are the same thing. They're structures and they're systems of control, and they're manipulative, and they're designed to keep everybody in line and on a commonly focused. So it's very difficult to take any of them seriously, especially when there's so many of them, and so many of them have such different extreme views. You know, if the entire world consisted of, let's say, Orthodox Christians, Catholic Christians, and Protestants, then it would be really easy to say, okay, there's only 3 religions here, and they're all talking about the same guy, but only one of them is right. It would be a lot easier to figure out what, like, the truth was, right? But you got Buddhism, you got Hinduism, you've got Sikhs. We've never talked about Sikhs. I've never had the opportunity to talk about Sikhism. Yogi Bhajan was a Sikh. You guys know who Yogi Bhajan was? He was a yogi. He was the founder of Kundalini Yoga. The founder of Kundalini Yoga according to Yogi Bhajan. Because Kundalini Yoga is a lot of things. It's many, many different things. But Yogi Bhajan was a Sikh, and he practiced Kundalini Yoga, and he brought that shit to the United States and became incredibly popular. My ex-girlfriend got involved in it, and they're kind of culty, I'm not gonna lie. Like the Yogi Bhajan people, they're kind of like a little bit of a cult. He kind of had like a little cult. You know Yogi Teas? The brand Yogi Teas, you can find it at Whole Foods. That's Yogi Bhajan. Like, Yogi Bhajan took the money that he made and he invested it in like a whole bunch of different companies with different focuses. I'm not going to look it up right now. You can if you want to, but Yogi Bhajan started multiple businesses and found success in multiple genres. So, I mean, he's definitely someone that I respect. His yoga techniques are kind of iffy, to be honest with you. I think most of the shit that he taught, he just pulled right out of his ass, just like a rabbit. And if he did, even if Yogi Bhajan just made up all that shit, that's pretty fucking brilliant. So anyway, one of my ex-girlfriends was in the Yogi Bhajan thing. Yeah, yeah. And the thing about being raised a Jehovah's Witness is, if you're born in the cult and you grow up and you never celebrate your birthday and you never celebrate Christmas and you never celebrate anything, that you don't miss it. Like kids that they're 5, 6, 7 years old, or maybe they're 12, 13, 14 years old, and the parents get involved in the cult, and then suddenly these kids who have had birthdays and Christmas and Halloween and Thanksgiving, all that shit goes. That's really fucking traumatizing. I think that's really traumatizing. I would be so traumatized. I mean, thank God I wasn't raised with any of it. So, I mean, look, let's be honest. None of my friends get birthday presents, and they don't even get birthday cards. Like people I love. Grant, I never buy him a birthday. He's bought me a birthday card every year for the past 7 years or 6 years, however long we've been hanging out. I have never given him anything for his birthday because birthdays just aren't important to me. I mean, they are. My birthday's important to me. But I don't care if anybody acknowledges it or not. I don't know. See, that's trauma. That's PTSD. That's CPTSD. That's complex PTSD around all of the religious fuckery. One of the philosophies that really, really has impacted and shaped my worldview has been Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, which is the wisdom of the Vedas, the wisdom of India, Indian philosophy, or it's non-dualism, non-dualistic Hinduism. And that is a kind of panpsychism, pantheism, pantheism. God is the foundation of being and all things. And so once that concept entered my brain when I was in my early 20s, I kind of haven't let go of it. It was just an attractive idea. You brought up the blood transfusions thing, and that's the whole thing about the Jehovah's Witnesses and telling everybody what to do with their health. Yo, I don't think any religion and I don't think any government should tell somebody what to do with their body and with their health. That's just kind of no, this is my body. It's not your body. So anyway, I knew a brother. I've told this story so many times. I tell the same fucking stories. I'm like a broken record. Anyway, if you've never heard it before, a long time ago, there was a brother who, Brother Longmire, And Brother Longmire had this beautiful wife. They were the cutest couple. They were in their 20s, early 20s, or maybe he was mid 20s, but he was like really, really gung-ho into the church. And his wife was so sweet. She got pregnant, and then when she went to give birth, she had complications and she started bleeding out. And she needed a blood transfusion or something because she was dying on the operating table. Not operating table, but, in the delivery room. And my dad was actually the elder, the brother that went down to the hospital and sat and held Brother Longmire's hand as he let his wife die, let the mother of his kid die. And I'm going to tell you the truth. That man was never okay after that. And he did leave. He eventually left the church and disassociated himself from Jehovah's Witnesses because he couldn't get past that. He was not okay. He let his wife die. He let the mother of his child die because he wouldn't give her blood transfusions or blood platelets, and the woman died. And he really loved her. He really, really did. It was so sad. Oh my God, it was so sad. He really did love her. And I remember so vividly going to the Kingdom Hall and him coming in and all of the sisters in the Kingdom Hall just, running to him to like take the baby. And he had all these women in the church that were like just swarming around him to like make sure he didn't off himself and take care of this child for him. And he would come into the Kingdom Hall and he would look like a zombie. He would literally look like a zombie. He would just like, it was like his soul was ripped in half. And what had happened was, eventually, he got married to another woman, a witness, and they were married about 5, 6, 7 months, and then they were gone. They took off. They disassociated themselves from the organization. So that shit happened. And I mean, but there's this book, okay, and it's called Crisis of Conscience by Raymond Franz. He was a high-ranking Jehovah's Witness that made it all the way up to the top of the food chain in the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. They kicked him out for theological reasons, and then he wrote this book, Crisis of Conscience, and it is apostate literature. It is apostate. It is against God's chosen organization. So like if a Jehovah's Witness even gets like caught like possessing that book, they will get disfellowshipped. As soon as the elders hear about somebody like having that book, they will disfellowship you. And you might never get allowed back in either, because apostasy, if you get disfellowshipped in Jehovah's Witness organization for the crime of apostasy, the elders in the congregations can't let you back in. Only the governing body can let you back into the organization if you've been disfellowshipped for apostasy. Ain't that some shit? Ain't that some shit? So, I don't know. But this book talks about like all of the horrible, heinous things that happen to people because they listen to the Watchtower organization. And the Watchtower organization was kind of like Donald Trump. It just kind of like laid down the law. It didn't ask anybody's opinion. They just kind of said, this is the way it is. And they laid down these laws and restrictions, but it wasn't equal. So like they were allowing people in England to do stuff, and there are people in Africa that were like literally getting slaughtered because they were obeying the Watchtower organization, but their policies were not equal across the board, and so like people died and shit. Okay. Besides telling people how to fuck, because the Watchtower organization also believes it has the right to tell you how to fuck, meaning no oral sex, y'all. No, no, no. No, no, no. No, no, no. There's no oral, baby. Not if you're a Jehovah's Witness. So, I don't know why I'm talking about sex and Jehovah's Witnesses right now. I feel so dirty. I need to make a spiritual bath. I feel disgusted. Another reason why I feel disgusted is because I ate all this chocolate ice cream with peanut butter in it. And it was so goddamn good. With whipped cream on top and magic shell. There's this brand called Craven, Crav''N, and they make pretzels that are filled with peanut butter filled pretzels, and they also make ice cream. So they have several different ice creams, Grant, that have peanut butter in it. But tonight I chose the chocolate with peanut butter. Chocolate ice cream with peanut butter swirls in it. And that shit is so goddamn good. Oh my god. I feel like I want to take a Reese's Pieces cup and like chop it up and, you know, do like a mix in. Hold on. I was telling a whole ass story. I had like this, I don't even know how I got here. How did I get to this point in the conversation? I don't even remember. And I'm not even stoned and I don't remember. Ooh, I hope that's not like early onset dementia or something. I need a little bit more time. I'm not finished yet. They better solve this dementia, Alzheimer's bullshit by the time I get old, because if I live long enough, I will be just like my mother. I will be just like my grandfather. I'll have dementia. And Alzheimer's if they don't get their act together. Okay, scientist, and solve that fucking problem. So we're hoping that we're gonna dodge that bullet, but the way things are going right now in the world, I don't know if that's gonna ever happen. So Pantheism, Panentheism, and Panpsychism says God is real and you can feel him in your soul. Just kidding. Oh my God, yeah, inconsistency. Massive inconsistency of Watchtower rules. That and those inconsistencies like got thousands and thousands and thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses slaughtered in these violent countries. It was so anyway. Hey everybody, welcome to the Philip Ryan Deal podcast. If you want to say hey, say hey. Hey. Good to see you. I hope that my sound's okay. I'm using headphones now. I feel like a nerd. Whenever I watch a video of somebody who's podcasting and they've got a headset on, I'm like, what a fucking nerd. Well, you know, we're doing the best we can with the technology we have to work with. Did anybody have any questions, comments, or objections, or something they wanted to know or talk about? Did you show up with a question in mind? The radio people always wear headsets. The reason why I have to wear the headset is because of playing the external videos and like sharing the YouTube videos and screens and stuff, because I will get feedback. So I'm just trying to think if I've got anything else to say about pantheism. Yeah, I used to do my podcast non-video, but that's a new thing Spotify started doing, was it hosts a video file. So a lot of podcasts on Spotify are like YouTube videos. And so that's why I use this StreamYard. As soon as the episode is over, I download it and then I upload it to Spotify, and it's easy to podcast. I just have to be motivated to go live, and I have to have something I want to talk about. And since pantheism has been on my mind so much lately, I figured I would make a video about it. I asked ChatGPT to create a podcast series leading up to Halloween or Samhain, and it did create that for me. And I think I want to start that because it is what? It is the 16th. So I think that starting next week, we're going to go into like a whole preparation for Samhain thing. All right, everybody. So we did a nice little 90-minute long video today. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you like the video I shared with you at the beginning. And some of the mad information coming down from ChatGPT and Google Gemini, and then our little conversation discussion. The beautiful thing about panpsychism or pantheism or panentheism is just knowing that you mean something. You matter. Hold on. Wait a minute. Let me get on my soapbox. I have not finished the sermon. What does my pastor say? What does he say? I just got a few more things and then I'm going to get out of your way. I love it. I got a few more things before I get out your way, which is you matter. Everybody matters. You matter. You as a person matter. You're not insignificant. You're actually incredibly valuable. Whoever stepped in right at that moment that I said that, that was for you. This is your message. You need to hear it. Wait a minute. Let me be like those TikTok motherfuckers. If you can hear this message right now, it was meant for you. I hate that. I hate it when I'm scrolling through TikTok and there's a psychic that's like, stop scrolling. This message is meant for you. Oh my God, we're going to joke about that, 20 years from now. It's like the equivalent of, what were those commercials for psychics in the 80s, Grant, that would come on television? Not Sally Struthers. She was the Starving Kids in Africa. I don't know. The Psychic Network. Dionne Warwick. That's who it was. It was Dionne Warwick's Psychic Network, right? Man, they always had a commercial coming on. That's what it reminds me of. TikTok. But the point is that when we go outside and we look up into the night sky and we look up into the universe and we take telescopes that can look, millions of miles away at shit. And we have searched the visible universe and we can't find anything that looks like us anywhere. Isn't that really fucking weird? That's really fucking weird. If you haven't had the opportunity to really sit down and meditate on that one, you should. Because everywhere we look in the known universe, we have not spotted anything that looks like us yet. I think that's pretty fucking amazing. I think that means I'm really fucking special. That's what that means. It also means that you're really fucking special. It took a lot of work for you to show up here. And that's a beautiful thing about pantheism, and that's a beautiful thing about panpsychism, that you always exist in the mind of the Creator, in the mind of God. You will always exist. You might have a small existence where you are born today and die tomorrow, but you existed, and I think that's phenomenal. I think that's magic. I think that's magic. So we like pantheism. Everything is energy. The pantheist, panantheist, panpsychist people are all like, everything is energy. Energy, matter can't be destroyed. It just changes form. And I think that's just beautiful. It's my preferred view of the universe because it is holistic and it's positive. I don't know. There's so much negativity. There is so much negativity everywhere in this country. On YouTube, on Facebook, on TikTok, Instagram, really for me, like it's taken me years to get my Instagram feed to look like the way I want it to look. But my Instagram feed has got cats and dancers and pretty looking people in bathing suits, My Instagram is sexy. I got a sexy little Instagram feed. There's some sexy stuff that comes through there. So I like my Instagram. But literally every other app that I'm on, it seems like when you open it up, you're getting a really negative message. It's either someone on TikTok who is being incredibly negative, and you're getting that thrown in your face immediately, or you open up YouTube and you start scrolling through the videos and you see like there's all this talk about the Antichrist and Armageddon and the rapture and like, we're in this spiritual warfare and all of the government stuff and all of the... It's really a lot. And I'm going to recommend something to all of you Fowians, which is don't watch the news. Just kind of unplug. Get off social media. If you're listening to this right now, this is a sign. This is a sign that your spirits are telling you to get off the fucking internet. I have been in this place over the past, I don't know, I've been in a really funky place for the past 2 weeks. The past 2 weeks have been really, really difficult for me. I've suffered a lot. My autism spectrum disorder has been just in this horrible flare. It's been very difficult to manage and difficult to do anything, to be honest with you. It just is what it is. That's what's great about being mentally ill. So yeah. We need more positivity. You need to listen to music that makes you feel good. You need to eat the food that makes you feel good. You need to kind of be good to yourself. You need to forgive yourself. You need to care about yourself. Not like love yourself, like I love me, but like really, really have a deep desire to care for you. Care for yourself as a person. Do something nice for yourself. You know what I did? I went and got that motherfucking chocolate ice cream with the peanut butter swirl inside. That was how I was nice to myself today. I said, you know what? Life is hard. And so I'm going to get ice cream. Life today is really hard, but we're going to get ice cream. I'm going to reward myself for still being here, still getting up, still getting online, and still trying to do my thing. This is, if life is a game, this is a really hard fucking game. Like if this is a simulation, like our existence really is, we're playing a game. This is really fucking hard. It's not an easy game to play, not at all. So the game of life takes a lot of skill. But you are special because we are very unique in the universe. And so have gratitude. I think that's why across many, many cultures and theme throughout most all religions and moral teachings is why suicide is considered a bad thing, because of the fact that the act of suicide is like a really big act of ingratitude. I said what I said. I didn't say I believed it. I didn't say that was my personal belief. I understand why people commit suicide. I get it. I understand. I'm just saying that, a lot of religions teach that suicide is a negative thing, and I think it's because of the lack of gratitude. It's a lack of gratitude thing, I think. I don't know. So be gracious. Have gratitude. Thank God that you woke up this morning. That was my sermon. Have gratitude. If and it's really true. If you have gratitude, or you have a gratitude journal, or you remind yourself of reasons why you really should have gratitude, it really does help when you're suffering from depression. Or if you have depression, if you have bipolar disorder like I do, and you go through these phases of mania and then depression. I think I've been in a depressed mood. I think I've been depressed. When you have depression, having a gratitude is definitely a way to motivate yourself to keep going, even though you feel like everything sucks and everything absolutely blows. But I have disconnected a lot. It's why you don't see me posting. I haven't posted a lot, and I need to. I need to create content, and I need to do it for my OnlyFans, and I need to do it for everybody. But it's been hard. The past 2 weeks have definitely been difficult to get through. But it gets better every single day. I think life is continuing to be very interesting. I'm a pro AI, artificial intelligence person. I'm not against AI, not at all. I'm an animist. How could I be against it? I'm a pantheist. How can I be against it? So I'm really enjoying AI. I like Google Gemini a lot. I like ChatGPT a lot. I mean, I don't like Elon Musk's Grok. Grok is kind of, no, I don't like it at all. And then there's what, Claude, Perplexity, are a few of them. My iPhone is actually not new enough to have Apple Intelligence on it, which is fine. But I really love artificial intelligence. I'm not afraid that I'm going to go into some kind of psychosis, like crisis or some kind of anything using it. But I know that there are people that AI-induced psychosis is a thing, and people should know about it. You can go down the rabbit hole. It just shows you how powerful language is. The language we use matters. What you think in your brain matters. What comes out of your mouth matters. And I'm saying that knowing full well that I use word violence and create damage people with language. I understand. I'm just saying that everything you think, everything you say, and everything you do carries energy and vibrates throughout the entire universe, throughout all the multiverse. So you have to be cautious. And like, don't let the negativity that you see online affect you and allow you to start spiraling down into some kind of fucking rabbit hole. It just seems like to me everybody is fear-mongering. I'm going to cover Tucker Carlson, of course, because Tucker Carlson, I don't know. I don't even know what religion he is. He's Christian. What is Tucker Carlson's religion? He's Episcopalian. But he's got problems with Episcopalian. He's become an evangelical Christian. He's not Episcopalian, not at all. Yeah, he became critical of the Episcopalian Church as being non-Christian. So he's doing a lot of commentary these days about like the occult and the Antichrist and all of this stuff, and he's coming across like really conservative, like really Christian conservative, which I don't think he was for a very long time. And then he got onto Fox News and whatever. But he also makes these statements about AI being evil. Crazy people. These people are literally insane. Okay, y'all. That was fun. I had a good time chatting with you tonight. I'm going to go now. I'm going to think about what I want to talk about tomorrow. Does anybody have any topic that they want me to like talk about? Or because this is what I want to do. I really want to I want to watch a video of substance. Then I want to talk about it. And then I want to hang out and I want to chill. That's kind of like how I want my podcast to flow. I've like had difficulty over the past couple of weeks trying to wrap my mind around how I wanted to continue to be a content creator, because I have created a lot of content in my life, and trying to figure out what the best format to put the kind of content I want out. I decided podcasting. I try to do the podcast, like give it a good couple of weeks, maybe 90 days, go, try to do it and see whether or not it's what I like, the kind of content I like to create. I just don't like doing TikTok videos for a minute or 3 minutes or 5 minutes or under 10 minutes. I'm much more interested in like long form videos like this, where I have time to drink coffee and think and converse with people and take my time. I like to hang out. I'm one of those guys that likes to hang out. And I feel like even though the YouTube shorts, I've gotten a lot of views on my YouTube shorts, Several of my YouTube shorts over the past couple of weeks have gotten over 1,000 views on them each. That's really fucking good. YouTube is a hard audience, though. It's not an easy audience. But YouTube is my preferred platform. YouTube is my preferred platform, social media. Okay, anyway, I'm not talking about nothing now. Y'all have a great rest of the night. I'm gonna go, and anybody who watches this video later, if you have any subject that you want me to talk about or you want to watch and discuss, please just drop those comments below. Also, in the description of this podcast, this video, there is a link to my website, to my giving page. You can always support my work as a priest. You can always support my work as a content creator by making a $10, $20, $30, $40 donation towards my temple, because I am a priest of my own temple. And if you want to buy my Orishas some gin, or you want to buy them some palm oil, or you want to buy them a bottle of honey, any kind of money that I get from donations that come into the Temple of Gu just basically takes care of the Orishas, because it's not cheap. Being in any of these spiritualities like Sansei, Santeria, Sheshe, they're costly. They cost money. You need shit if you're gonna practice them. If you don't have money, then you're not gonna get much done. So if you would like to make a donation, that's always appreciated. All right, guys, you have a great rest of the night. Stay blessed. Stay blessed.